All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Hands On. My name is Alana, and I am from the Innovation Cluster. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Innovation Cluster, we're a not-for-profit organization that supports startups working in innovation and technology. We do so by offering advisory services, access to partnerships, and then workshops such as this one. We encourage you to apply if you have an innovative idea or a startup working in technology, and you can do that by going to www.innovationcluster.ca. So again, welcome to Hands On, creating high-performing technical teams. So our expert speaker for the day is Mark Rabkin. Mark has been a founder or CEO 3 times over. He has managed teams at Apple, VC-backed startups, and a management consulting firm. He holds an MBA from Cornell University and has completed advanced programs in executive coaching, chaplaincy, meditation, and neuro-linguistic programming. So today, some of the highlights that you're going to hear are analyzing survey results from some senior tech execs, discover evidence-based strategies for team success, and engaging in an interactive dialogue. So I know that we only have an hour, so I'm going to pass it over to Mark to get started.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that introduction, Alana, and pleasure to be here. Appreciate you all taking time out of your day to participate. And I'm just doing the share screen thing. And let me get this into slideshow here. Okay, great. Before I get started, a couple things about me. I do a bit of executive coaching. So if after listening to this, you want to contact me about that, that's great. But I'm always happy to share the research I do in this regard with folks. So my coaching firm is called ActiveBee. And when I started this, I was trying to figure out one of the things I wanted to do. And my career has been largely based in Silicon Valley. And one thing you will see consistently in Silicon Valley is there are a lot of brilliant people, and they're not all brilliant people leaders. And so I thought there was a need there. And for those of you that have been paying attention to the drama over the weekend or last week with OpenAI, you can see a very high profile version of that playing out. And of course, that's playing out every day across much less high profile companies. And so I think there's a lot of need for people that are on this call that have these great ideas. And you might have a great team as well. But the trick is, how do we get teams to work together well on a consistent basis? So what I did is I went out to my network and I was able to interview 36 very senior technology executives. Now, if you look at the executive population that I interviewed, you'll see that very few of them were CEOs, and that was on purpose. Because what I really wanted to focus on was what's the formula for creating great technical teams? Now, what I'm going to read back to you and what you're going to see here applies to more than just technical teams, but the focus of the survey and the information I'm going to share today is about technical teams. So you can see there were a couple CEOs, a lot of CTOs, vice presidents, and a few directors. You'll also see that it was a very experienced group. That reflects my network. Depending on how good the video is, you might see a little bit of gray hair here and there. And so these are people that I knew, right? And I wanted senior people in this as well. Now, what you'll also see is the company size. Now, the company size is where they were at the time of this survey. Almost all of them had worked for startups, had worked for mid-sized companies, had worked for Fortune 500 companies because of the length of their experience and because this was a Silicon Valley population. So what that means is it's not uncommon, as you all know, in my generation for people to switch jobs every 3 or 5 years, and that average has gone down over time, right? Now, as I was looking for what makes high performing teams, I was like, is there any kind of measure I could work out and to sort of base this on? And there wasn't really a good measure benchmark that was just obvious. But one thing I could look at is how many of the people surveyed worked for a company like Microsoft, like Google, like Facebook, like Apple, right? Where you go, oh, wow, they worked there. Oh, okay. I know at a minimum, they have a pretty high level of competency in their skill set, whatever that skill set capability is. So about a little over 2/3 had, 31% had not. That doesn't mean they weren't part of or didn't lead high performing teams. It was just an interesting statistic. You'll see the ethnic background breakdown here. This is pretty common for, again, somebody in Silicon Valley who's built a career. It's pretty reflective. Again, white Caucasian male. If I was a different ethnicity, the percentages would switch around because it is a pretty diverse population. But at the same time, you see the societal rules or mores norms, work out over time, typically in people's networks, not always, but frequently. Now, the one thing I'll mention about this as well is I was trying to get women into the survey population. And there were 4 women that I was trying to, that I knew that were interested, and we could never quite connect. So what's interesting is this survey was done with all men. Now, if you think about that for a moment, tech firms have gotten better about including women. There's still a lot of work to do. And if you're looking at median experience level of 26 years, right? There's far fewer women in that sort of range than there are men, because it's been historically a male-dominated group. Not to say there aren't wonderfully successful women, and a fair number of them. Like I said, trying to get them into the survey just didn't quite happen, so it's worth noting. I think it's interesting. All right. So it was a 10-question survey. And the first question I asked were, what are the top 3 challenges in leading technical teams? And the most popular answer was mission alignment. So in other words, whether that was vision, goal, etc., alignment to that. And then right after that, and related, was intra-team alignment, right? So that getting the team aligned within itself. Now, let me also make a comment on what you're seeing here. Most of the questions I asked were, I think all were qualitative in nature. So I would get qualitative answers, and these were people I knew, so it was a little conversational. Formal survey, you ask a question, you be quiet, you take that answer, and then that's your survey answer. So to put this into presentation form where I could summarize the findings, just to be a warning, there's a little bit of thumb on the scale here that I had to do to be able to do this. So, but it is indicative and accurate. Now, this survey was done really in the second half of 2022. So this was before the tech layoffs of this year. So at that point, finding, hiring, retaining, which is always an issue to find the right talent for the right job in tech, but it was a little bit elevated at that time. I don't know if that score today would be quite as high. My guess is it would be still high. And then from there, you look at this idea of creating community, which ties a little bit to mission and intra-team alignment. And you're going to see this idea of community creation come up several times in this survey. Community is a broad word. So what does that mean in this context? It really means people that collaborate, communicate, cooperate, help each other, right? That's what a healthy working community looks like. If we were talking about other types of community, it could look a little bit different. But that's really what we're talking about here. And so then a few people mentioned this idea of balancing strategic and tactical, right? Gee, if you're in a pressurized situation to get a product out, I know I can get it out quickly and on time if I engineer it this way, but I know it's not going to be the best for scaling, and we're going to have to go back and fix it later. And when we go back and fix it later, it's going to be more expensive, right? In terms of time, resources, dollars. So, balancing those kinds of decisions. And then for some of the folks, again, we live in a much more global world than we used to. And so distributed teams across the world with the different cultures and time zones can sometimes be challenging. So then the question was, what excites you about leading technical teams? The number one answer by a smidge was making a meaningful impact. And several people mentioned doing something right, which is a callback to what Steve Jobs in the early Apple days would say. This is the opportunity for people to, in a professional environment, do something right. So how can I do a tech leadership survey without a callback to Steve Jobs, right? So that's why that's there. And then right under that was creating something innovative and new. And if you think about it, those are paired, right? It's difficult to make a meaningful impact without creating something innovative and new. And generally, when you are creating something innovative and new, you're trying to make a meaningful impact. Now, let me be very clear what, again, because this is summarized, what creating something innovative and new means. It doesn't mean, building an air taxi when air taxis were just a concept. What it could be re-engineering an existing process. Different people, different teams, different companies have different definitions of what innovative and new is. And whatever is innovative and new for a particular team, that's fabulous. Then people liked coaching and mentoring a lot, which is great to see in leaders. And because, again, technology environments, working and learning environments, a must, right? And those two are sort of paired. A few people mentioned working with passionate teams. Great. What frustrates people about leading technical teams, and what you'll see throughout the survey is a lot of these paired questions, right? So number one thing is self-centered behavior. And I think we've all seen that and know what that refers to. You can see it, where I've seen that personally is sometimes, not always, it's just, people have tunnel vision around what they're trying to do, what they believe, not very open, right? And that creates a problem if it's a team-oriented environment. What that also tends to lead to, right, is they're committed to whatever their vision is. And if that's not aligned up to the mission, right, that creates a problem, remembering one of the first slides I presented. And if this is the extreme version of that, that's going to tend to lead to personnel problems. Now, something else that came up here on the right, you see poor organizational communication. That was true for people in startups and large companies. Just because it's a small team doesn't mean that organizational communication is great. And again, think about the idea of, if it's important to have mission alignment, if it's important to have community, what do you need? You need communication, right? And then there were some minor mentions of, again, the challenges with distributed teams, retention. People have found themselves, I know I have, in low integrity cultures on occasion. And that's never pleasant for those of us that don't like that. So what works for leading high performance teams? Most leaders really felt that when the teams were empowered and they owned their results, that's when they got their best benefit. And as well as, and then having a motivated team that's committed to vision and goals. Now, think about this. If you've got an empowered team who own the results, that's probably going to drive more motivation and more commitment to vision and goals. If you've got a motivated team that is committed to vision and goals, chances are you have more opportunities to empower them and enable them to own the results. And then if you look down across the right along the other things, culture of collaboration, quality of communication, fail fast, learn fast, people first culture, small teams, lead by example. To me, these are artifacts of agile culture, right? That's what I felt was reflected there. That's a little personal commentary on what I heard there. What works poorly for leading high-performing teams? Oh my God, the amount of vitriol pointed at micromanagers was unbelievable. I had to calm a couple of people down during the conversations, right? They were just re-experiencing some unpleasant experiences. So, that's, the thing that just, drives people crazy. If you've ever worked for one, you've probably know that experience. The other thing that's more interesting to me on this slide is unclear goals, right? Because, it seems pretty simple, right? Hey, we're going to set this goal with our stakeholders, whether those are investors, whether it's our executive team, whether it's the people delivering, whether it's our partners, our customers, right? We're going to be very clear on what we're going to do, and everybody should be able to align around the goals, particularly if they're, somewhat straightforward. Yet that is really the art and science of leadership, isn't it? Right? Because how many times have you found yourself in a situation where somebody sets a goal that is unrealistic, somebody sets a time frame that is unrealistic, the goals change rather rapidly, either because of market or something happens with funding or resourcing or talent, right? So it's this fluctuation of goals when it gets to too high a frequency or there's general lack of clarity really can cause a problem for teams, right? And again, I would sort of relate, micromanagement and unclear goals, then there's a tendency, for leaders to get into this fear-based management structure where the beatings will continue until morale improves. And there's some people that believe that that is a good leadership style. It's not for me personally, but they're out there. And of course, you can have misaligned teams. We've talked about big egos and poor communication. Waterfall versus agile was mentioned. Short-term view. So what are the top characteristics of high-performing teams? And I mentioned community earlier. Look at this. 86%, almost everyone in this survey said community was the number one thing, followed by high performers. Now, let me be very clear about the high performers line, because people were very clear with me about this. This does not mean that you need a team made up of 10x developers or something like that. What people were saying when they were talking about this was that you can't have a high-performing team without high performers, right? If everybody on the team is average, or everyone on the team or is performing at an average level or a low level, or most of the team is, or even a good portion of it, it's hard to have a high performing team. So I'm going to do one sports analogy here. I think it was 1973. The NFL football team, the Miami Dolphins, were the only team ever to have an undefeated NFL season and win the Super Bowl. But at that time, they were referred to as like the no-name team. And what it meant is there was no one on the team who was truly a big superstar. There were certainly players that got more attention than others, but there wasn't like this super breakout performer. But as a team, on a win-loss basis, the best team in NFL history, right? So that's a perfect example of what sort of people we're talking about here. And then here you've got this clear goals mentioned again, this idea of rapid feedback, domain expertise can be important, and how the team is configured can also matter. Now, this was interesting. I asked people, as your career advances, how do you learn to lead? Now, 94% of the folks said on the job, right? So that was the number one thing. The next thing was people were looking for mentors, or had not looking for, had mentors. Now, it's very important here for me to break this down. About a third of the people who said mentors helped them learn to lead, about a third of them said, yeah, I had a mentor who I got a lot from. They spent a lot of time with me, big impact. About a third said, yeah, I had some mentors. They made a difference. It was good. A third had, yeah, I had some mentors, got something out of it, right? So it sort of broke down that way. And the same thing with regards to content, which is the next most popular answer. And when I'm referring to content, it could be a course they chose to take, they were sent to by their company. It could be books, it could be online courses or podcasts or whatever. And again, that broke down by thirds. I think there were 4 people in the survey who had either gone to seminary or through like the military officers training. So I labeled that advanced training. And then I joke about the couple of people that had gotten some executive coaching, because again, as someone who was launching an executive coaching business, I said, well, either I've got a big market or I've got a market where it's hard to find clients. And the fact of the matter is both of those things are true. So that was fun. I found this question fun because it had the most varied answer. What do technology team leaders want to learn? Number one was improving communication skills. But again, let me explain what some of the variations are in that. Some people were like, I need to get better about communicating to my board or my business executives or partners. Other people were, I need to be better about coaching and mentoring or communicating about the technology capabilities and skill sets that I have, or to the people involved. So it was all over the board in terms of the type of communication that people wanted to improve, but it was the most popular answer. So then you see optimizing personal productivity high up on the list, managing scaling, always a challenge, right? A common theme in conversations, particularly for startup folks. And then some folks looking at how do I get a little more detached when I'm stressed? And you can see, that, hey, I need to learn more about business or identify my blind spots, how to lead diverse teams, benchmark my own leadership. These are the kinds of things that were coming up that people wanted to learn. And then I found this answer fascinating. So how do tech team leaders measure performance? So think about this for a moment. The people that I'm talking to are very quantitatively oriented. They are very senior technology practitioners. They've been successful on the business side of it, right? So, again, they may have qualitative skills, but their training and their orientation is somewhat quantitative. So I expected to get a quantitative answer here. And what the most common answer was, where it says outcomes or results on the right, was I know it when I see it, basically. And so my question for them was, well, what about KPIs and OKRs and things like that? And they said, those are useful, but they're far too static for the dynamic nature of most of the technology environments that these folks worked in. So generally, for example, OKRs are set once a year, and it takes a lot of time to do them correctly. So once they're set, they're set. But things can change during the year, right? And so they might be indicative, but they're unlikely to be accurate. And people felt KPIs were too much of a straitjacket most of the time. Now, again, it depended who I was talking to. One VP I was talking to, managed an application, very complex application, large support engineering team. So for him, it's a little bit more ticket driven, right? So for him, KPIs played a bigger role. So again, this is going to vary a little bit based on, what's the type of team you're leading, what's the type of thing that you're doing, what's going to make the most sense. In the business world, MBOs are more popular, which means management by objectives. In the tech world, not so much. So then I asked, what does a team need to overcome to become a high-performing team? So the idea behind this question was, what's the hero's journey, if you're familiar with that, which is an archetypical journey. So whenever you see a hero story, whether it's from ancient times or it's the latest Mission Impossible movie or whatever, there is an arc to that story that is called the hero's journey. I believe that wording was coined by the psychologist Carl Jung. Might go back further than that. And so the most common answer was, well, teams need to form. They need to, go through the storming process, which is a little bit of friction and tension to get to the norm, how they're going to perform. And then you can get them to high performing. So if you're just putting together a team, or you're just coming into a team, or you're making changes to a team, right? There are stages that team is most likely going to need to go through to truly become high performing. It's probably unreasonable for the team to be high performing from the get-go. Now, if you have a high performing team, you're probably driving growth and you're going to add people to it. Is that going to make the team, become not a high performing team? Unlikely, but you might have to give that person a little bit of time to get up to speed, to integrate, and there might be changes that result depending on how your community, how that team works, how that individual integrates. So something to pay attention to. And then high-performing teams are committed to the vision. And there's one thing I perhaps should have said on the first slide that I'll take this moment to say is, so we're talking a little bit about vision and mission and goals, right? That's not a one meeting thing. That's not a one presentation thing. It's not a one-time thing, right? If you're going to have a culture and you're going to have a goal and mission and vision, you have to integrate that into how you're speaking, the stories you're telling, how you're complimenting people, how you're disciplining people when that is necessary, right? It has to be integral throughout what you're doing if you really want, a vision or goal or mission-driven culture. So the next thing is the team needs to be able to prioritize and execute. If they're constantly looking to the leader to make all the decisions, right? The leader is going to become overwhelmed. And they're going to become a bottleneck. So people talked about as well some mentions of communication, budget and resources, always an issue, retention. Again, it can be easy in technical environments to get lost in the detail. So we're getting close to the end of the questions, and then I'll pull everything I'm talking about together. But one of the things I was curious about is I asked folks, who's the technology that you admire and respect? And what you'll see is you'll see about 20 individuals listed here. 16 were kept anonymous for a variety of reasons. Sort of just people either didn't want to put someone in the spotlight, they wanted to ensure they were going to remain anonymous. What you'll see though is, and if those 16 answers were here, this list on the left, the powers behind the curtain, would be much longer. These were people who individuals worked with, either for or as colleagues. Sometimes the person worked for them. And these people were just very influential in influencing how the people I surveyed developed their professional persona in how they move through the world. You can also see there were some very well-known or relatively well-known teachers and evangelists. And of course, you've got sort of the celebrity founders and CEOs, as well as the CEOs that were mentioned as well. Now, what I asked as well was, what was the characteristics of these admired and respected technology leaders? And then I did, as you can see, a word cloud. And you can see that the results orientation was the number thing, but it wasn't the hard driver. I'm going to, just be that aggressive, assertive person who, leads by directive and fear and gets results. No, they were positive. They were teachers. They were available. They were creative. They were humble. They had integrity. They were curious, right? So it was the holistic version of the leader that really, at least this population, really had the most admiration and respect for. So I liked that. So I have shared a lot of information and a lot of data from this survey with you today. So what I'd like to do is take the next couple of slides to pull that together into a narrative so that you have something that you can take away from this that you can remember. Because, let's face it, what I just showed is very difficult to remember, right? But there is this path that came out of me gathering all of this data and interpreting it and taking a look at it. So, number one, as I've mentioned a few times, ensure that the vision is communicated in a meaningful way. And here's what I mean. In something called neurolinguistic programming, which I won't get into too much here, there's a saying that goes something like this: the quality of communication should be measured by the results it gets. And so for any of you who have children, right, you've had this experience or been around children where you communicate very clearly, right, what you're trying to communicate. And when that communication is good, you get the result you want, right? And that same communication at another time doesn't get the results you want. What does that mean to me? It means that the communication, again, in that setting, for whatever reason, didn't work. And you see this in politics, well, whatever your politics are, right? Whether you happen to be someone who was a fan of Ronald Reagan or you happen to be someone who was a fan of Barack Obama, they are both excellent communicators, no question of it. But if you did not agree with kind of them, didn't matter what they were saying, just washed over you. So pay attention to, even if you're a very good communicator, are you communicating in a meaningful way for your particular audience in that particular context, right? And just as important, for whoever you're talking to, what's their role in making it a reality, right? Oh, great, we've got this vision, but what I'm doing, just, I don't see the connection, right? That's not helpful in terms of keeping people motivated and engaged, right? So, and then you want to make sure that the individual contributors team are aligned with stakeholders so they get frequent feedback on the results and feel empowered to make decisions. And here's what I mean by this. If I'm leading a team and I go meet with whether it's the board or the customers or some internal partners, and they give me some feedback, and I bring that back to the team, it's going to be a little bit abstract to them, particularly if it's critical feedback. Now, if I take one or two team members with me, and they hear the fact that this customer that we're developing for is incredibly unhappy, what's going to happen? They're going to come back to the team and go, oh my God, you should have been in this meeting, right? So use that as a way of both engaging team, making the team more effective and efficient. And it also provides them an opportunity to grow professionally by seeing some of the things that go on behind the curtain, right? For those that want to, some won't want to engage that way. I've talked already a little bit about this one as well. As a leader, and again, this is the art and science, gets and agrees on clear, realistic goals and timelines with stakeholders. And again, easier said than done, but so important. So if you've got clear expectations and you've got frequent stakeholder feedback, you can leverage that to create a collaborative community. And what that enables is objective discussions, right? Of what needs to be done, how it should be done, right? And you want to set that up where that's good, where there's trust and there's the desire to help one another because it's a team and it's not a situation where my way is the best way. And if not, I'm not going to participate, right? And as I mentioned, as you're meeting with stakeholders, one of the key to growing leaders, often what you'll find in technical environments is communication skills need to be developed over time for people to grow into management positions and leadership positions. So take the opportunities and knowing, find the right opportunities where that they might not present as well as you're going to. Perfectly fine, right? It's the opportunity to, help them prepare, have them present, give them feedback, have them grow. And to be that mentor, right? That so many people want to have and don't, right? And I know that all of this takes time and time is precious. But again, if you're going to create a high-performing team, it's probably not a low investment of time. So it goes with the territory. And then, so important, of course, to recognize achievements and value contributors in an authentic way. And so what I see in this is I've gone to, as my background suggests, I've gone to so many of these seminars where at the end, somebody gives me a very nice certificate. It's laser printed, it's signed, it's got a pretty gold star on it, all this good stuff. And I take those and I get them they give them to me in an envelope. I file them, they're somewhere in my garage. That's cool, I like it, not a big deal to me. Other people get those certificates and they're like dancing around the room. Like they love that kind of stuff. So what do the people on your team value? What does your team value as a team? What do the individuals on your team value? And, again, I think done well for people that want to grow, constructive feedback, and just as well as acknowledgement is just as important. So I think if you combine these these 6 steps that I've been talking about, you can certainly have a very strong foundation for creating a very high performing technical team. And like I said, a lot of what I've talked about, I think, can be very easily extrapolated with minor modifications to teams in general. So I hope you found this helpful. I'm more than happy to engage in conversation, curious what you think. And if you want me to go back to any of the slides, we can certainly talk about those.
All right, so if anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself, and you can ask Mark anything that you have.
Pardon me, I can't hear you. I don't know. It's very light. So if you can adjust, great. If not, if you can put it in the chat, and Alana can read me the question that comes up in the chat, I think.
Sure.
Yeah. So why did you want?
Oh, they might be on another call.
Yeah, there's a meeting taking place next to me.
Oh, that's what it is.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I thought it was just someone answering your question.
No.
Question.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions, again, just feel free to unmute yourself and you can ask Mark, or you can put it in the chat and we can read it from there as well.
Yeah, and then.
Mark, I've got a question for you.
Sure.
What would you say the ideal team size is for a technical team?
So there's a couple of answers to that. Most studies have shown that when a team gets beyond 6 people, the manager cannot spend enough time with people. The bandwidth is, the proper bandwidth isn't there. And that also goes back to Amazon used to have this rule when they were in startup mode, right? Where no team could be bigger than, 1 pizza feeding them for dinner or lunch, right? So, it's that kind of thing. Now, that being said, there's no one size fits all rule, right? So you could have a very complex project where, particularly where I think in my mind, where I could see this breaking down. So one of the CEOs I interviewed, and I don't know what his team sizes are, but he's doing some very advanced, complicated robotics, very complicated robotics startup. And so he's got hardware engineers, he's got electrical engineers, he's got software engineers, both at the application and the OS level, right? So I'm guessing he may have teams, or at least intersections, that would suggest teams that are much larger than that. But I think that tends to be the exception rather than the rule. And then, of course, a large company is going to have teams of teams, right? Many times. So did that answer your question? If it didn't.
Yeah, I would agree. I find that a team in a software world, anyways, 5 is probably a good number. I am curious about your experience in, the whole remote work team communities aspect of things. So how in a remote setting do you best find to build a community?
So it's interesting. So I do have a day job. I'm a director of data and AI for Cognizant Consulting. And, we've been very remote since COVID started. I was hired just about 4 years ago, right before COVID started. And I think that it's important to have team meetings. I think it's important, if you've got teams of teams, for them to, get together once in a while. I think it's good to do things like
Yeah.
ice cream socials or whatever it is, whatever's gonna work. Not a lot, right? Because people don't want too much of that because everybody's busy. But I think that you have to put more stress on the communication. A good friend of mine works for a very successful company called Doximity, which is in the telehealth space. They were designed to be remote from the ground up. But given that, what they do is they bring the whole company together once a quarter. And even though that's expensive, it's less expensive than, all the office space in San Francisco they would have had to take out. So, I think it's things like that. I think it's ensuring that the proper level of communication and engagement, updates, how are we doing, what are people doing, and judging how much people want. Because again, it's going to differ. We have meetings and there are certain people that just don't show up. They're like, I'm good, I'm doing my thing, and that's good for them.
So you have teams where members don't show up to scheduled meetings?
So like the big group meeting. So, we've got, dozens of people in the practice, and there are individual contributors that don't show up. So what are you going to do?
Yeah. Have you found any tools that you like to use that help in the online, remote technical team leadership space?
If you ping me after this, I will ask a friend of mine who did a deep look into it. He works, and he's the guy who works for Doximity. So I can find out from him what they're using. It's not my area.
Thanks, Mark.
Looks like there might be a few questions in the chat, Alana.
Yeah, so some of them are just comments, but there is one question. It kind of feeds off of what you were just talking about the community building. So this question is more in regards to retaining talent and how the investing in talent seems almost like a waste when it comes to all of these events, when you put so much investment and then you end up losing them ultimately. So I think the question is more so how, like, best practices to avoid loss.
Sure. So it was interesting. So I'm going to reflect back on an experience I had. I was working for a startup. Startup was based in San Diego. I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area. I worked out of a co-working space in San Francisco. And I was having a conversation with 3 or 4 of the software developers that were working for another startup that was in the co-working space. And the subject of sort of, the perks that you get or used to get when you worked at like a Facebook or a Google, came up. And I made some comment like, I don't think that those kinds of things are really all that useful, and they seem very expensive to me. And they said, well, you're not going to get the best talent if you don't do that stuff. I said, well, I think I like to have talent that is committed to the vision or mission or goal of what we're doing. And again, that's not exactly what I said, but I said something along those lines, right? And the point is that if you are hiring people because you pay well for the position, plus you're offering perks, and you're basically in benefits. And so if you're hiring mercenaries, essentially, right, then they're going to be there for a while until they get the next best offer, right? Because they're oriented to get the best deal they can. If you're hiring people, and again, I'm not suggesting you don't pay people, well, you won't get the right people. But if you're hiring people who are committed to the mission, to the vision, then I think if you're, again, creating an engaging space, in a space where people feel like they're doing something meaningful, creating an impact, right? Going back to my slide, doing something innovative and new, right? I think you're going to have retention. And again, I'll give an example. Zappos, even after they were acquired by Amazon, had this policy. They would, someone would make it through their interview process, and they would say, okay, you have a choice. You can start on your start date, or you can turn down this job and we'll give you $5,000. And for the people that turned it down, they would get a check from Zappos for $5,000, because the view was, if someone just would rather take the 5,000 and go work somewhere else, from Zappos's perspective, that was a great return on investment in terms of weeding out the mercenaries, right? Now, if you're a startup, you're not going to be able to do that. I get that. It's an expensive, well, if you're not a VC funded startup, Zappos, I think, did it even when, but they had a lot of money in the bank, right? So I think that's the nature of my comments. And, you know, again, happy to go further on that if there's a follow-up question.
Okay. Right now, I don't see any follow-up question, but there is an additional question from a different participant.
Sure.
So they're asking how they can measure team performance through their emotional intelligence or personality behavior. So I think this is more so what tools you would use to examine those things about an applicant.
Sure. Yeah, so
yeah.
there are a number of pretty good tools out there. There's Traycom, there's DISC, there's another one that I'm forgetting. There's a small industry with about a half dozen firms in it that provide these sort of personality psychology type of assessments. And again, it's something that like someone like myself can do. You can find coaches and folks to do that. They're not super expensive, but they're also not inexpensive. So it goes back to a question. If you were talking to me interactively, I would say, you know, let's articulate the problem you're trying to solve, and let's figure out first if spending the time on money on the assessments is the best way to solve the problem that you're looking to solve. And the reason I say that is also, if you're doing it in a team environment, you may find that some people are totally up for it, some people are neutral, and some people may not want to do them. And so the question is, again, before you go through that whole process, like, what are you hoping to get from it? Can you get it in a less expensive, more sort of organic sort of way? And again, there is a time and a place for those kinds of things. Again, open to follow-up comments, questions on that.
I didn't see any questions, but a question that I would propose is, are there any top like 3 red flags that you would say when considering a new team member, and things to avoid during that process?
Sure. So there's two things I would suggest. First of all, whatever your interview style is, get people to tell a story. My 2 favorite interview questions are, the first one is, and again, it's a series of, there's 2 categories of questions, and it's a series of questions. The first is, what professional accomplishment are you proudest of? So hopefully they tell a story with beginning, middle, and end. I asked them what obstacles they had to overcome, how they overcame them, and what they took away from that experience. Now, sometimes some of those sub-questions will get answered in their story. So that's one conversation I'll have. After I've asked that question, I ask, what is something that you were involved in or led or did in a professional environment that just didn't work, that didn't meet the goal? And again, same question, they tell a story. Okay, what, you know, if it wasn't clear, or I'll dive into a little more detail. How did you deal with that obstacle? You know, why didn't what you try worked? And most importantly, what did you take away from that experience? What were your learnings? How does that influence you today? Biggest red flag, and I've never had anybody do this, but if somebody says, oh, well, I've never done anything that didn't work, right? No. The other thing somebody might do is they might use a really trivial example. And if I can't nudge them into a bigger example, then I'm not interested in hiring them. The other thing I suggest that you do when I am preparing for an interview, Amazon has a publicly available interview process. I think it's 6 to 10 questions that they ask based on Amazon's principles. And again, not every company should or does have Amazon principle, but what they're looking for people to do is to be able to answer those questions with a story of a beginning, middle, and end, or that where it's very clear that people are demonstrating the values that you're looking for, right? So I think it's really important to have a strong sense of values when you're hiring, and to interview that above and beyond, you know, whatever the skill sets and capabilities for a particular job are. There was one more thing I was going to say about that. Oh, here's the hardest thing about interviewing and working with people. Think about this. We probably, if you're in a small team, you spend more time with your small team members than you do your loved one, right? Your romantic partner. Now, most of the time, an interview process is essentially 3 dates, if you will, in this context, and then let's live together, right? So we're surprised. Why are we surprised when this doesn't work out, right? So I think that, you know, you have to do the best you can with interviewing, and the more structured and educated and conscious and intentional you are about it, the better results you're gonna have. But it's a very difficult process just because of that nature, right? It's a limited amount of time, and then you're gonna spend a lot of time together. Any other questions that I might be able to answer?
I don't see any other ones in the chat, and we're right on time. So if you're ready, I think we can start to wrap up the
Sure.
session. Yeah.
Sure. So I do a bit of executive coaching. If you're interested in contacting me, this is how to find me. The site is pretty static, but it's there. And you've got my mobile. That might actually probably text me is probably the better way to get in touch with me, quite frankly. I'm happy to talk to you about executive coaching. I know for one person here, I said I'd do a little bit of research and get back to you with something. So happy to do that. And thank you so much for participating in this session and sharing your time with me. And with gratitude, just wish you all the success in the world. And I sincerely hope you got value from this conversation.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Mark, for your time and for your expertise. We really appreciate it. And thank you to everybody else that sat in for the session. Stay tuned to our social media for our next hands-on workshop. And thanks again.
Great. Thank you, Alana.
Okay,
Thanks, Mark.
bye.
Thank you.